The science fiction movie we're going to have a look at today is about being stranded on the planet Mars. No, unfortunately it's not The Martian. Cue title card.
Now, I know I've probably said it before about a different film, and will no doubt say it again about another film, but at this point, Horror of the Red Planet is most likely the worst movie I've ever seen. In every aspect it fails, whether it be acting, directing, pacing, sound, writing, props or effects, this film fails in all areas. And I've seen plenty of bad films, but this review has actually taken a while to write, because having watched the movie, I had to wait a few days to really fully comprehend what I had seen. It's the kind of film made from someone who doesn't understand the concept of storytelling to any real degree. To explore this claim, we needn't go any further than looking at this film's alternative title, namely The Wizard of Mars, because this film was supposedly supposed to be some kind of sci-fi adaptation of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which instead placed it on Mars. Which means, you guessed it, the entire movie is a dream sequence, with the film starting with them going into a dream after encountering a storm, and eventually ends with them following a golden road, meeting a giant floating head, and then of course waking up. However, rather curiously and utterly bizarrely lacking is the film's equivalent of The Wicked Witch of the West. And without an equivalent, the film lacks conflict. It's literally about 4 characters going on a long walk until they eventually come to a destination. But, once again, that's another 2 elements of The Wizard of Oz, which The Wizard of Mars is curiously lacking. You see, in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, there are 4 characters, each with an individual character flaw they perceive themselves to have, who want to undergo the journey, hoping that the end result of that journey will improve their issues. It's a little thing called character motivation, which storytellers use to make their characters believable and relatable, rather than them just being 2-dimensional characters simply doing things to progress the plot. In Horror of the Red Planet, all 4 characters are exactly the same and completely interchangeable. That's including Dorothy. Their characters are so poorly written and explored that aside from not wanting to be on the Red Planet, I couldn't name a single character trait of any of them. And without any character traits, there's no character flaws, and without any character flaws, there's no possibility of character development. Further, on the subject of destination and character development, they also have absolutely no idea of the Wizard of Mars, so they're not even on a journey of self-improvement. And because of all this, when they finally do come across this film's equivalent of the Wizard of Oz, which is an alien, they don't really have much to ask of him, except for the standard Dorothy line of wanting to go home. However, the film even manages to mess this up, because the alien is exactly what he says he is and not a con man at all, and therefore the ability to go home wasn't inside them all along, and so they don't even learn that about themselves. In fact, in the end, it's they who have to help the wizard. So let's recap. If you take away the character's knowledge of the Wizard of Oz, take away the character's traits, set the entire thing on Mars, and take away the Wicked Witch of the West, what exactly are you left with? Well, I can actually answer that question for you. You're left with a film in which 4 bland characters fall asleep, dream they're lost on a planet for 60 minutes where almost absolutely nothing happens, and then wake up. Or in short form, you're left with Horror of the Red Planet. So obviously the storyline is utterly terrible, and as far as adaptations of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz go, this is not one of them. It wanted to be one of them, but it can't be considered as one, for the same reason that if you want to bake a cake, but don't have any of the ingredients, and don't know how to cook, what your end result is, regardless of your intention, is probably not a cake. But that's shockingly not where this film's comprehensive list of failures ends. I'm not exactly sure what went wrong here, but there was definitely a lot of it. I was actually under the impression while watching this film that it was probably originally not English, perhaps Italian or Russian, because it seemed to me that the film had been poorly dubbed. This can be seen in some films like Assignment Outer Space, where it's hard to tell if the acting's bad or if it's just the dub that's bad, because it was originally done in a different language and then brought over into English, so it doesn't really match up properly. However, if the Wizard of Mars' Wikipedia page is anything to go by, this film was in fact always English, and with that being the case, I can't imagine what went wrong with lines like this.
What's to stop us from trying a Mayday call now?
Despite the origin of the film being English, it is clearly dubbed. This is not uncommon in films. If the camera picks up too much background sound, they simply have to dub the lines. However, I can't imagine why the lines are dubbed so poorly. Presumably those dubbing the lines were the same people who actually spoke the lines in the movie, so I'm not really sure why they had so much trouble delivering all of the lines, and further baffling, I'm not really sure how they had so much trouble lining up the lines with the movement of the lips. It makes sense when the dub changes language because the lips were moving for the original language spoken, but when it's an English film being dubbed in English by the same actors who spoke the English in the first place, it shouldn't be this bad. In the failures of the prop department, the machine used to start and stop time is a giant pendulum with a cartoon sun on it, which looks like it would be better suited on the set of Play School rather than a science fiction movie. And then finally, the pacing. This movie could have been easily edited down to 20 minutes long without losing a single scene by simply cutting out long pauses or unnecessary dialogue. There are multiple examples of this, which, make up the entire majority of the film, but the first one to spring to mind is the 10-minute long monologue spoken by the Wizard of Mars towards the end of the film.
Its age has no equivalent in your concepts of time. Be it enough for you to know. Our race has witnessed, during the span of our evolution,
He drones on in this monotone voice for so long that during this scene, I actually legitimately fell asleep, only to wake up several minutes later and find that he's still talking.
So now that I'm just about done complaining about all the negatives, does the film have any positives? Well, sort of, but only in two scenes where the film very briefly stumbles into the zone of so bad it's good before going back into the zone of just utter boring. The first of these two scenes is when they're asleep in rafts for some reason and they're attacked by vines with giant guppy mouths. I don't really know why, but it made me laugh hysterically. It should also be noted that this is the only adversity the characters face throughout the entire film, excluding the terrain of Mars, of course. And they just chase them off with a couple of shots, and it's at the very beginning of the movie. So it sort of immediately goes downhill after this, which is kind of a giant shame because it's not exactly a high point to begin with. And the other being this 4-minute long scene in which the characters sit perfectly still in their rafts in an underground cave, talking about how they've been there for 5 hours and how quickly the current is carrying them.
We've been in here 5 hours now, and no sign of the way out. We must be going deeper underground. That would explain the heat.
After everything we've seen so far, I'm afraid of where we'll end up next.
That sound. There's trouble ahead. Falls.
This scene would have probably worked a little bit better as a radio show or any other medium where you couldn't see that the water is in fact not moving.
If the only two redeeming factors in your entire film are two scenes that are so ludicrous that they're accidentally hilarious, then it's probably safe to say that your film is not a very good one. And so, rather unfortunately, I have to say in closing that Horror of the Red Planet is not a very good film. It fails on all fronts, and aside from the two minor exceptions I've mentioned, there's nothing in it worth watching. So if you've really got your heart set on watching a science fiction adaptation of The Wizard of Oz, you should probably watch the far superior Futurama episode instead.
Thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, I have been and still am Grim Grindle.
Before the story, let's look at the clock.